Well, good afternoon and welcome all. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces and some new ones here this afternoon for our racial equity, the Synod's Racial Equity Ministry event. I'm Mary Nervig, and I am the convener of our Racial Equity Ministry team for the South Central Synod of Wisconsin. And we have been hosting these afternoons, Sunday afternoon, once a month presentations, and will continue to do so. This evening, we are really fortunate, as we have been all along in our presentations, and Christa Fisher, who is the former chaplain of the Dane County Jail, will be talking about incarceration, patriarchy, and, oh my goodness, don't worry about it. She'll tell you what she's here to talk about. And I'll let you know that that the next one, which will be a follow-up to this presentation, will be July 29th. And then also keep on your calendars August 12th. It's really pertinent, but unfortunately, we didn't know that it was going to be this pertinent. Mary Farmer, who is also a pastor in our synod, was at the border for 3 months this year. So she will be talking about her experience at the border on August 12th. So 2 important dates to keep in mind, July 29th and August 12th. And the other thing I'd like to let you know is Just Bakery, and Krista will talk about that as well. Just Bakery is selling some of their baked goods today, which is why we didn't present any hospitality, because we really want to support Just Bakery. So help yourself to some coffee, and anytime you feel like you want a little snack, please just feel free to wander out and get something from Just Bakery. And with that, I'd really like to welcome Krista Fisher.
Good afternoon, or early evening. I'm not sure what we would call this. So let me just get this on here quick. I'm so glad that you're all here tonight, and I'm hopeful that you're going to walk away from this evening with information that you did not know before. But before I begin, let's start with some prayer. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for this gathering of your people this evening, of your sons and your daughters. And we ask that you bless our time together, that you make this time a time of deep learning, of awakening, of illumination, and of emotional engagement. God, I ask that you open all of our hearts and minds to this information. You do not close us down, but you open us up. And you leave us, or you send us from here feeling determined and empowered to be part of your mission of liberation in this world. Amen. So as Mary said, I am the former chaplain of the Dane County Jail, and I did have a presentation planned tonight, but that has changed because my role has now changed. So rather than recapping some of the information that is available for you through books and movies, I'm going to offer you information that only those of us who have either served time or who have served others in the Dane County Jail are prepared to offer. So again, I'm hopeful that you'll walk away from here with some brand new information. And I want to start with a story. This is a story about a man that I knew. He, when I was chaplain. So I'm just going to describe the scene for you. He's in a segregation cell, so the room of the cell is it's a large enough white cinder block room that has multiple cages in it. These cages have steel doors and windows, small windows. And I don't know what's going on, but I see something's happening in SEG, in solitary, and there are deputies who are present, there's mental health staff who are present, and I'm asking, I'm not interjecting myself because that would not be allowed, but I'm asking, how can I help in this situation? Is there something I can do? And they say, no, we got this under control. Well, the number of deputies seems to multiply, and the mental health staff are there, and they're all trying to figure out what to do with this man who is, they would say he's out of control, and really, he's in a really bad place. He's naked, and he's taken all of his clothes off, and he's just screaming and swearing, and he's beating on the walls, and they want him to calm down, and he won't calm down. And the more they want him to calm down, the more he escalates. And I keep coming back over the course of, I don't know, maybe 30 or 45 minutes and just checking in to see what's going on. And they keep telling me we got it under control. Well, at one point, he looks out the window of his cage, and he sees me. And we have a relationship. And he points at me and he says, her. And I know him, and I didn't know that's who was in the cell. I just knew somebody was in crisis in the cell. So the deputies bring me in, and the crisis is over. This isn't about me. This is about love, the power of love. The crisis is over. The deputies leave, the mental health staff leave. He and I speak for a few minutes. We both put our hands on the window and sort of touch hands and share some words, and he's exhausted by this point, so he just needs to rest. But for the rest of the day, he's calm. He just needed to see someone who cared. The power of love. What I want to talk about today is the difference between love and fear. Love is a kingdom value, and fear is not. Jesus speaks about fear over and over and over again in the New Testament. Fear is debilitating in the Old Testament. And it's my belief that fear is the foundation of this system. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Oh, we were supposed to go to that already. So anyhow, but it's a great quote from a guy in jail, and he said I could use it. Herbert is somebody who most people would discount. I don't know if you know Herbert, John, but he's somebody that most people would discount, but Herbert is wise. He is a wise man, and there's deep truth in this. And when you treat somebody as though they are an object or they are less than human, this is what you end up with. If you could go ahead, please. Okay. So, as I said, I am not the chaplain of the Dane County Jail anymore. And I just need to be very, very clear that this presentation is not at all affiliated with the Madison Area Jail Ministry. I'm not employed by the Madison Area Jail Ministry. They're not sponsoring this. They did not help me prepare this presentation. They have not condoned it. This has nothing to do with the Madison Area Jail Ministry. So where is the camera? Right there? This is not affiliated with the Madison Area Jail Ministry. I am a free agent at this point. My colleague, Catherine Goray, who's just walking in right now, she just finished worship at her church. We consider ourselves between appointments. We still work for the same boss, but that boss has taken his time trying to figure out where he's going to place us. So, if we can go again. Okay. So as I said, it is my theory, my hypothesis, and again, this is based on my lived experience in the jail, serving in the jail for 5 years, that this institution, that this industry is based in fear. And this quote here, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. This is my theological foundation, that as a Christian, that Christ came to ensure that we have life and life abundant. But I want to be clear that it says they. Jesus in this text is speaking to the Pharisees. He's speaking to the religious leaders. He's speaking to the institutional leaders who are involved as an institution in the oppression and the sublimation and marginalization of God's people. So Jesus is speaking directly to the institutional leaders and saying, I have come to free the people who you are keeping in spiritual, emotional, and whose physical captivity you are participating in. And this is my theological foundation, which I bring to this presentation. So again, as I said, I believe that the foundation of this institution is fear. And I don't think that's a radical idea. I want to ask, how many of you lock your houses? Okay. How many of you lock your cars? How many of you have passwords on your cell phones? How many of you have passwords on your computers and your bank accounts? So, why? To be safe? Safe from what? Theft. To be safe from theft. Is that the general consensus? So to be safe, and that is because we are fearful that something might happen. Now, this might be a responsible action. I'm not suggesting that it's not, but we need to think about whether our actions are based on responsibility or if they're based on fear. And I would argue that that oftentimes our fears are exaggerated. Now, how many people here have actually had their homes broken into? Oh my goodness, that's more than I expected. I had mine too in college. Okay, well, that's more than I expected. But nonetheless, I still want to point out that I think our fears are exacerbated. Our fears are maybe disproportionate, or our fears are not an accurate representation of the world that we live in. This is Saturday's Wisconsin State Journal. And in this journal, you'll see there's violent crime here, violent crime here, and then we can go on. There's more crime. In the state and local section of the Wisconsin State Journal, there were 12 stories. 9 of them were crime-related stories. 9. That's about 70%. Of those stories, 6 were of people of color, who were either the victims or the perpetrators or both. On Channel 3000 on Saturday, there were 39 stories. Of those, 16 were of violent crimes. Not all these crimes are even taking place here in Wisconsin, which is interesting. 16 crimes and 14 others that were fear-producing. So of those 39 stories, a full 30 of them have the impact of causing fear, of creating fear. Today's Sunday paper had far fewer crime stories, but it had 3 pages of obituaries, which on the one hand makes us face our mortality and causes fear. On the other hand, all of the obituaries and all of the anniversaries and all of the birthdays were of white people. So where we have the numbers I just quoted about the crime stories that are highlighting people of color, and then we have these lives that we're honoring, these people that we're celebrating, that are all Caucasian. This isn't the reality of the world that we live in, but we come to believe that it is. We come to believe that there is significant fear, that there are threats everywhere and things that we need to be afraid of everywhere. These stories are not reflective of our reality. Of those crime stories I just told you, again, 70% violent crimes in Saturday's paper. Of the people that are actually arrested and held in the Dane County Jail, this is institution-wide, of those, only 30%, a third of them, are alleged to have committed a violent crime. And for youth, the rate is almost minimal. Those are facts from the Prison Policy Initiative, so I would encourage you to look that up. So the reality is not what we're seeing, but we're responding to this because this is what we're told is reality. Now, this is important because this relates to the jail. Where do these people go when they're arrested? Where do they go? They go to the jail. Yep, they go to the jail. So the Dane County Jail houses 16,000 people a year, according to Sheriff Mahoney. And according to the paper, it would lead you to believe that everyone who's in the jail is exceptionally dangerous. Everyone who is in the jail is capable of a violent crime. Everyone who's in the jail is untrustworthy and is a perpetual threat. That is what you would be led to believe. So this makes us feel a little bit safer about ourselves. No doubt about that. There's one person off the streets, we have one less reason to lock our doors. But what does it mean for people who are working inside of the jail? The deputies and the staff and the administration, they read the paper, they have similar life experiences on the outside as we do, right? So they bring these same fears to the jail. Plus, they are also taught and they are trained to be suspicious and to never trust. And then they are immersed in work which reinforces their worldview that people are not to be trusted, that they are a threat. Just the mere fact that they're working with hundreds of people each day who are locked in cages reinforces that worldview. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the jail is understood to be, I'm going to say it's not, okay? It is not full of, but it is understood, it is believed to be an institution that is full of dishonest, dangerous, criminal-minded, or criminal-thinking people. So if you work in that environment, what are you supposed to do? Well, this is where my observations come in. I have observed that the policies and the practices which exist in the jail are designed to proactively minimize or to mitigate any potential threat. So the first thing is that you come to everything. Oh, that's not the right slide. Okay, we can just stay there, it's fine, it's good. If everyone is a threat, or if everyone is a potential threat, if people are considered to be dishonest and untrustworthy, what posture do you bring to your work each day? It's a posture of suspicion. Everything poses a threat, from the pencil from the pencil that you use, to the way that you hold your body, to the look that you have, to the way how long you're in the shower, how quickly or slowly you eat your food. Everything has the potential of being a threat because you are dishonest, you are untrustworthy, so you are, if not now, you will eventually be up to something. So I want to give you an example of this. We had a woman who was tutoring, who had spent probably 9 months tutoring this young man. And she went to see him every week. And you spend 2 hours together, and the tutoring often involves sharing your life story. Often for people who are working on literature or on literacy skills, they write their story. They tell it and they write it. So she came to know him well. And he was being transferred to prison. And he asked her if he could write her. And she said, absolutely. And then he asked her if she could get his property for him. And she said she would. She went down to the property desk, and the woman who was there on staff, now this is not an indictment of the woman necessarily, it's an indictment of the system and the way that it teaches you to think. The woman on staff told her, he is manipulating you. He's going to ask you if he can write you. He's going to ask you if you can get his property for him. He's going to ask you for money. Have you given him your home address? Because now you're in danger. And she went on to list all of these things, and the tutor was beside herself. She thought that she had been played. Now, they had spent 9 months together in conversation. He opened his soul up to her. Of course they have a relationship. That's not manipulation. That's what you hope for. That's the goal. He asked her to get his property. If she doesn't get his property, it will be destroyed. and he has no one else. That's not manipulation, that's life. He will ask her for money, and she will put money on his books, because everything in jail costs something. And when you have no support system, you need people to help you. So asking for $20 isn't manipulation, this is relationship. This is what happens in relationship. But this can show you how everything that someone does can be understood, is looked at through a lens of suspicion, and can be seen as a possible or potential threat. So that's sort of an example, but what happens then is that the jail clamps down on people and it attempts to disrupt or interrupt any potential situation. And it does this by scaring people into submission. It does them by keeping them on their toes with no predictability of what the rules are, when they're going to be imposed, how they'll be enforced, and through physical control, which we'll talk about some of this. I will make time for questions in just a few minutes, but I want to get to a certain point first. So some stuff you need to know. The Dane County, and again, I'm speaking to the Dane County Jail because that's where my expertise lies. The Dane County Jail is 3 buildings. It holds men, women, and children, teenagers, the majority of whom are innocent because they have not gone to court yet. They have charges pending, but in the United States, we say people are innocent until they're proven guilty. So the majority of people who are there are innocent. So, and again, but according to Sheriff Mahoney, 16,000 people a year. So you come into booking. It's the first place you go is into booking. And they take your fingerprints and they put your information in the database. Now you're innocent. Why do they take your fingerprints? Why? Anybody have any idea why? To check for priors, okay, yep. So there's suspicion there, right? Yep. And then, even if you don't have any priors, they share that information with other databases. Because you're likely going to be a threat somewhere, even though you're innocent. Am I right, Jerome? Okay, good. If I say anything wrong, you call me out, okay? Okay. And then you go to the holding section. Again, you're still innocent. Holding is a big room. It's like a fishbowl room with all kinds of bunk beds. And you're there for until, I don't know, you're there for a few days, a week and a half, it depends, until either you're released because you can post bail or until you're moved to a new section of the jail. But when you're there, and again, you're innocent, you don't get any property. So you can't have a Bible, you can't have a Quran, you can't have a book of prayer. You have very limited visits. Your family can't visit you, at least not initially. Can they ever visit you in holding? Okay, nope, you get no visits in holding. You get one phone call, one free outgoing phone call with limited time. Phone calls are free. And the Dane County Jail is such an institution that I'm sure they could negotiate some contract to make phone calls free or extremely low cost. So why don't you get a Bible or a Quran? Why can't you talk to anyone? Why can't you see anyone? Why? You're innocent. If you're guilty, though, you could be who knows what. I want you to think about that from suspicion, okay? You could be conniving, you could be networking. I honestly, I don't know why they do that, but I believe that it is a way to minimize any potential threats, because everything is about minimizing threats and minimizing incidents. And then you go into long-term housing after that. Now, we've been told that the average stay in the jail is 30 days. That might be the average, it's not the median. The median is probably closer to 6 months. So there are some people who come in and out very quickly, and then others who are there for 2.5 years. So when you do the math, the average might come out to 30, but when you look at the number of people who are there, you have most people there for at least 6 months, the majority of them. And now, the number one way that threats are minimized or threats are interrupted is through this arbitrary and inconsistent application of rules with arbitrary and inconsistent consequences, which means you are constantly on your feet. You are constantly looking around, trying to figure out what's going on, what's going to happen next, where it's going to come from, who it's going to come from. So the best thing to do is to just curl up, to sleep, to do nothing at all. But better make sure you get up for head count. The only way you can get in trouble if you're asleep is if you don't get up for head count and make your bed and put your uniform on. But beyond that, anything you do might get you in trouble. I'm going to give you an example of an arbitrary implementation of a rule, and I can do this because I'm the former chaplain. So a year ago or so, I went to see a man for individual spiritual care. And the deputies got out the shackles. We had been in the jail for 50 years, the jail ministry. They'd never shackled anyone for spiritual care, but they got the shackles out. As of that day, it was a new rule. Any man, not women, not a woman, not that women should be, neither should men, but again, the arbitrariness of this, any man who wanted to have a visit with the chaplain or a tutor or potentially even worship had to be shackled. So now the men, when they were meeting with tutors, had their hands and their legs shackled, and they were supposed to be doing work somehow. It was an arbitrary rule, and I had to sort of follow this path to figure out where in the world this came from. And I found out that it came from the potential of what could have happened. Somebody was left unaccompanied, somebody who was incarcerated was left unaccompanied in a room, and he had been in a meeting with somebody from the, I don't know, like probation agent or someone, I don't know who it was, but somebody who works for the system. And he was left alone, so he got up and he went to look for a deputy to take him back to his cage. But he could have done something. He didn't, but he could have. So because he could have, there was the potential, even though he followed the rules, all the men were shackled now going forward. All of them. All of them. And we made some progress on that, but in tutoring, the men are still shackled. So that's an example of the arbitrariness. Where did this come from? You would expect that he would have been praised. He had this opportunity, and he followed the rules. So, okay. Actually, I'm going to pause for any questions. Okay, then I'll just keep going. And I appreciate you being here and listening to this. These are stories that we don't know. We don't know about this stuff because the people who are locked up are rendered silent. They're invisible and they're silent. And Catherine and I love the men and women that we serve, and we are grateful for the opportunity to start sharing some of the things that the community needs to know on their behalf. So a Christian value, a faith-based value, any of the faith traditions speak about community and relationship. Those are essential to who we are as humans. This is a kingdom value. Because the jail functions from a place of fear, along with a number of other things, punitive and dehumanizing, etc., but I'm focusing on fear today. Disruption and prevention of community is essential. Because community is necessary in faith traditions because community is where relationship develops. And that's core to who we are. But in relationship comes conversation. And if you're suspicious, conversation can lead to scheming. It can be the beginning of a much larger problem. So it's better just to nip it in the bud right away. Just don't even let people talk to each other. So the rules are, there's no talking in the bunk rows, which is where the deputy can't see you. There's no talking after lights out. It means you're whispering. The deputy, you can't do that. No more than 2 people can walk at the same time in the cell block or in the pods. You can't have more than 4 people at a table at one time. And regularly, people are moved from one cell block or one pod to another when they get too comfortable, if they're developing friendships. That's real. That's the reason. That is the documented reason for why people are moved around, because they got too comfortable and they were developing friendships. And there's no sharing. You can't share anything in jail. Catherine had people start tithing, saving for the folks who had money, she had them saving their money so that when someone would come in and could only get an indigent package, which is a bar of soap to last you 2 weeks, no shampoo, no conditioner, and a toothpaste and deodorant, she had people tithing so that they could buy their brothers and sisters a bottle of shampoo, a bottle of lotion. But that's against the rules, because that creates relationship. Love is expressed in vulnerability, in our ability to be our full selves. And that's rare, that's hard to come by. No matter where you are, whether you're in jail or on the outside, being vulnerable and being authentic, being real is hard. But when you're allowed to do that, people who love you make space for that. The chaplains make space for that. The tutors make space for that. Teacher Deb, who teaches the high school program in the jail, she makes space for that. But individuality is also considered a threat, because with individuality is the beginning. It's the seed to agency. It's the seed to self-empowerment. So anything that demonstrates that you are your own person, and these are subtle things, can get you in trouble. And by trouble, I mean get you put in SAG or get you put on bunk restriction for 24 hours. And some of these things have to do with individuality. Other ones sometimes I think are cultural things. I think it is, the responses are, let me explain. So if you have the wrong look, if the deputy doesn't like your look, you can get put in SAG for that. Now that could be about individuality. It could also be a white deputy interacting with a black person who's incarcerated, and the racial bias says that looks threatening. That looks even more threatening. You're an inmate and you're black, and I see that look. Your tone, your posture, these are all things that can get you put into SAG, and they happen far more often for men and women of color. So you can get put in SAG no matter what, but you are at an even more disadvantage if you are a person of color, because your race comes into play and makes you a double or a triple threat. If you ask legitimate questions, like about your employment, trying to find a job while you're in Huber is really hard, because you get to meet with the job agent once a week, and you don't get to talk to the people that you've interviewed with. All communication has to come through that job agent, so you need to talk to that woman. So asking, when is she coming? When is she coming? Do you know if she's heard anything? Being persistent about your own self-advocacy can get you put in SAG. Asking a question like, when's the newspaper coming, has gotten people put in SAG. And additionally, the deputies have duct tape or electrical tape, the bright yellow tape, around the deputy stand, so that folks know, so that there's a personal space, or so that they are not allowed to cross that line. And if you cross that line, if you go beyond where you are allowed, you can get put in SAG. And that only matters if people are dangerous, if they're a threat. They didn't care if I crossed the line. I never had to ask. If you could go to the next slide, please. So the legacy of love is agency, knowing that you are someone. Someone. When you believe that you are someone, that you have worth, that you have value, that you have power, that you are deserving, the world is yours. That's dangerous. People who are threats and who are self-empowered are dangerous. This was something that Catherine regularly spoke about. I am someone in worship. When I was leading women's group, we taught women self-defense in our group. But we also spent a lot of time helping women understand why they had the right, why they had the worth and the value to use that self-defense when necessary. So some of the ways that the jail limits self-empowerment, these are the things that make you feel good about yourself. No excessive exercise, which means no push-ups, no sit-ups, limited number of squats. They've got really strict rules on how you can exercise. And again, I think honestly that this has more to do with the black men than anything else, because it just makes them more of a perceived threat. No leadership. Leadership opportunities are not allowed in the jail. So you can't lead a Bible study in your pod. I mean, you can, but there are arbitrary ways that the rules are imposed and inconsistent consequences. So if you lead a Bible study, you take a risk. If you lead a prayer group, you take a risk. We used to have people assume leadership roles in worship because that's what we do, right? We are the lectors, we are the deacons, we assist with communion, we lead children's story time, we lead the music, we offer testimonies and spoken word. All of those things are considered leadership, and they are not allowed in the jail, and there are consequences for that. No groups in pods or cells. I learned this my first week. I came, because there were no Bible studies at the time, I thought, I'm just going to go into a cell block and bring my Bible. I'm the pastor, as pastors do. I'm going to sit down at a table and say, whoever wants to join me looking at scripture, come on over. I told the deputy when I came in that I was going to do this, and he said, go sit at that table. And I had the guys sitting with me, and we were getting into the Bible study, and about 10 minutes into it, I had a tap on my shoulder. It was a captain who came and escorted me out and told me that there were no programs allowed in pods or in cell blocks. So that was a sign to me too about my place when I got there. And the programs that exist, they're limited. They're limited, and your ability to participate in them is extremely difficult. I'm going to pause. Any questions? I'm concerned that there are no questions. SEG is segregation, solitary confinement. Yeah, there are different degrees of it, but it's all segregation. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Can a prisoner, do you actually call them prisoners in the jail? No.
No, I call them people.
Excellent. Can any one of those people request a visit from the chaplain, which is no longer existing now, but can that happen? And if you are called to their cage, do you speak to them through the door or the peephole or the?
Yeah, so it depends upon what kind of unit you're in, but if you're in a cage with bars, then there are often a double set of bars. I don't know how far between the bars are, but just about enough length where if I stick my arm through and he were to stick his arm through, we can pass a pencil. So we do spiritual care through that. And then other people who are in cages with solid steel doors, we speak through the food slots, the little food slots on the ground. We have conversations that way. We used to be able to regularly pull people out and have private conversations in private rooms, but that's not as accessible anymore. So that's how we do that. Yeah. Are there more questions? Okay. I assumed there weren't.
Well, does the age of the jail does the age of the jail impact that somewhat? I mean, just, they keep saying it's old and we really need to change our structure. Does that make some difference if we had a more modern jail? Would that make it better?
A cage is a cage. Whether it's got steel bars or it's I mean, that's my perspective. But still, even in the pods in the newer jails, we still can't have private conversations. It's still our ability to access, to be alone with people has been drastically reduced. Yes.
Any rehabilitation going on?
Well, I'm going to get to that. So, yeah, I'm going to get to that in a minute.
Are these new rules just for Dane County, or is that a broader geographic area?
Well, these are Dane County. Mm-hmm. Yes.
What's the definitional difference between a cage and a cell?
They're the same thing. I've been using the term cage for a while. That hasn't been so well received. But now we're talking about children in cages. And this is a crisis situation, absolutely. The immigrant children who are being held in cages. We have a lot of our own children who are also being held in cages. No child should be in a cage, but also no man or woman should be held in a cage. So cells and cages are the same thing. And the pods are prettier, but you're still locked in a room. And locked in a room with 50 people that you don't know and you don't necessarily want to know. And you don't get to leave. You can't talk to them. I mean, you can. Again, it depends on the deputy. It depends on the deputy. So, and the deputies change. They're, rotational. So, yeah. But you are locked in a room. So, imagine that. Just even if you have a luxurious bathroom. Because I did this the other day. I was taking a bath. I thought, what if I couldn't leave this bathroom? This bathroom is beautiful. But, within an hour and a half, I am ready to get out of there. What if you couldn't? What if you were in there for 3 months? What if you were in there for 3 days? What if you were in there 3 months, 3 years? And this is a luxurious bathroom. Even a bedroom suite, you go stir crazy after a while. Okay, Brian, okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is reincarceration and freedom. And again, my theological foundation is this idea of liberation, life abundant through liberation. And we talk about rehabilitation. I want to point out again that the majority of people who are in the jail have not been found guilty. They're innocent. So we're making assumptions about the people. We're making assumptions that they need to be rehabilitated. I would argue that we are all in perpetual recovery. And the folks who are incarcerated may be in specific forms of recovery, or may need to be, but we are all in perpetual recovery. So, self-empowerment, agency, leads to freedom and liberation. But I would argue that the jail is not interested in freedom and liberation, because the people who are in the jail, again, are considered untrustworthy, a threat, dangerous, criminal-minded thinkers. And then they're released. Does that make us feel any safer in our community? What would make us safer? Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to get to that. But yes, that would be an ideal world, but in the circumstances we currently have, what would make us safer is get them off the streets. Get them back in jail. Because they're still as untrustworthy, they're still as dangerous, they still have this criminal thinking. We don't want them on the streets. This does not make us feel good. We need them locked up. That's what makes us feel safer. If they believed that people, if the jail came from a position, a posture of love which wants to see the liberation and the unification of all people, then we would be having programs. We would be having programs, but there aren't programs inside the jail. I mean, there are programs, but they're minor compared to the need and compared to the desire. For instance, worship, as just one example. There are 3 buildings. Men's worship we were only able to offer it in 1 building, and only to 8 people a week, and only to 1 wing. So we rotated from wing to wing to wing every week. So if you were of the chosen 8, you might get to worship once every 3 weeks. But there's, I don't know how many people in a wing, 50, 75 people in a wing. Catherine was going to do research on this. That was part of her plan, was to research the need, do a needs assessment. So I can't say what the need is necessarily, but that's an example of the programs exist, but they are not meeting the need. And then there's no there are very few resources to help people transition from inside to outside, to find housing, to find employment, transportation, health care, to get their ID, all of these things that are necessary for success. There's very, very little available. There are maybe 1 or 2 people that are working on this in the jail. So there's very little support for that. So not only are there not programs inside, and there's not support inside for the transition, people are often put out at 5:30 in the morning when nothing is available to them, and often they're put out and it's not announced. They're just told, get your stuff, it's time to go. So you don't have the ability to prepare. This is a setup. And most people, because it's such a horrid place, plea out rather than go to court and fight for their constitutional rights. They plea out, and that plea includes probation. And when you're on probation, you have a series of rules that you have to abide by. And if you break a rule, this is not a criminal offense. If you break a rule, or if there is an allegation that you broke a rule, you will be arrested and put back in jail. And you will stay there without the opportunity for bail until they do an investigation and determine whether or not to press charges. And it's even, so I want to share a story, and I'm hopeful. Serena, did you bring anything with you? Okay, my friend Serena's back there, and she'll have some information for us when we're over. Jerome, did you bring anything about Expo? That's okay. I will email you all with information on Expo. So, my good friend Khalif is in the ported, what is it called?
Ported Columbia County Jail.
Columbia County Jail, thank you. He's in the Columbia County Jail for allegations. Somebody said something about him. Khalif is a leader in our community. He's a mentor to students. He's an activist. He speaks the truth. He's a good, good man with high morals, higher than mine in many ways, unfortunately for me. He is a good, good man. And there was an allegation made about him by somebody who wanted to hurt him. So he was arrested, and he was put in jail, and that was 5 months ago. The district attorney has said he's not pressing charges. Who else? There are a couple, the district attorney has said, there's nothing to substantiate this. I'm not pressing charges. But he's still in jail. Because He's on parole, probation, parole. They're different, depends upon if you're coming out of jail or prison. He's on parole, and so he still has to go, in theory, he has to go before another court. It's not really a court, but they call it a court. That's what they call cages cells. They're not cells, they're cages. So he has to go before a court, and he has to prove his innocence. Even though the district attorney has said, there's nothing to substantiate this. We will not press charges. The majority of people who are in prison, 50% of people who are in prison are there because of this setup, this revocation, this probation and parole revocation. I could say more about this, but the point is, this all comes from fear. It's all driven by fear. We make money off people, which I'll speak to in a minute, but it starts with fear. We don't want people on the streets because we don't feel safe. We will feel safer if they are locked up. So we create rules that make it easy for us to lock them up, to trip them up and lock them up. So as I said in my announcement, I was going to talk about the Trinity of Oppression and the way that is experienced inside the jail. The Trinity of Oppression, patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, which result in and feed and perpetuate this industry of enslavement. Enslavement has always been an industry. It has always been an industry. And I'm not going to tell you the history of that. If you don't understand that, I implore you to go educate yourselves. We have a series, we've got a reading list in the back, a movie list in the back. Get it, go home, study it, and dive into it. This isn't the format for that, the venue. But so I'm assuming that many of you here understand when I say enslavement has always been an industry. It continues to be an industry. And it is, and the jail, incarceration is the newest. It's not that new, but it is the current manifestation of enslavement. And incarceration comes from, so enslavement and white supremacy, you can't separate the two. I'm hopeful that you got that. Patriarchy, this is a patriarchal institution. All of the administration and all of the staff are men. I mean, there are a handful of women, but the people who are making the real decisions, with a few exceptions, are men. And it's a militarized institution. It is a civilian military, and the military is a patriarchal institution. The majority of people who work here, who work in the jail, are veterans. So they come with that life experience and with that mindset. So, and capitalism. This is an industry, and our country makes a lot of money off of it, and it supports a lot of jobs. Dane County Jail, which is not a private prison, it is a county jail which is funded and operated by the county, is a massive employer, and we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, Brian. Okay, this is about patriarchy. So, in God's kingdom, there is no hierarchy. In God's kingdom, wait, is this right? I don't know, maybe it's right, I'm not really sure. In God's kingdom, there is no hierarchy. In God's kingdom, there is nobody who is superior to anyone else. And so if we are to bring love into the jail, we need to completely reorient how this is structured, because the jail, as I said, is a militarized patriarchal institution with a clear hierarchy. And those who are incarcerated are on the bottom. They are at the bottom of the foot. There is the sheriff, the deputy sheriff, the captain, the lieutenants, and the deputies, the staff, and then there are the incarcerated, who everyone is supposed to serve. But the incarcerated are more like the captured prisoners, and they're locked in cages, like the captured children that are weighing upon us right now. So, like a military, or this is a militarized. This is a civilian military who has been given permission and is even mandated to enforce physical and emotional violence against its own citizens. It does it in the streets, and it does it in these institutions. And some of the ways in which this patriarchal worldview comes into play in the jail, some very specific ways. Now again, all of the decisions of this institution have always been made by men and by white men, even though the majority of the institution is not white male. So it comes out in policies that are not policies that are problematic. I'll say that. At a very simple level, the indigent kit. Okay. This is what you get. If you don't have any money, and that means nothing. You can't have $1 on your books. You have to have no money at all. And if you do have money, they may look to see how you spent it to see if you're worthy of getting this. So you get a bar of soap, a little thing of a little toothpaste, and a deodorant, which is actually smaller than this, but this is all I could find at Target. And you get one of those little black combs. You know those little black combs? Now, for some of you, for some of the men here, that little black comb might work. For me, that would not work. For my daughter, who is mixed, that definitely would not work. And there's no shampoo, there's no conditioner, there's no lotion. This is, a woman did not come up with this. And a black woman definitely did not come up with that. Video visits. They're now implementing something called video visits, which there are pros and cons to the video visits, but, and I'm making generalizations about men here, okay, so I apologize. I know a lot of you men are not like this, but we're talking about patriarchy here. And I know that as mothers, we would never support video visits. We want to touch our babies. We want to see our lovers. We want to hold the hands of our mothers. We want to be able to look into each other's eyes. When you have a video visit, you can't even look in the eyes of the person you're talking to because you're looking at different cameras. So you see their forehead and they're looking down, and I don't know what they see on the reverse, but you don't get to have that connection. And there are mothers who are giving birth in jail, and then their children are taken. Now, the jail is not a place for kids, but we could come up with a better solution. If this were not a patriarchal institution, we would come up with a solution for the well-being of these children. And if this were not a patriarchal institution, we definitely would not be putting women in chains while they are giving birth to their children. We women know that no woman is a threat while she is in labor. Okay. Brian, if you could. Okay, capitalism, this is right. So a kingdom value is abundance. There is a surplus. We don't deal with scarcity. God has enough for everyone all the time. No, we don't need to be greedy, right? But there is always enough. God always comes through. Well, capitalism is the complete opposite of that. Capitalism is about me and mine and getting getting it before you do, making sure I have more than you do. So the jail, so capitalism fundamentally requires a certain level of unemployment. In order to function, and I'm not going to go into the details of this, if you need to know more, check it out. There's a great book called Capital by, I think it's by Friedman. I could be wrong about that, but it's a fantastic book, and it'll explain all of it. It's a tome, but it will explain it to you. But capitalism requires a certain level of unemployment in order to exist. It also requires a certain percentage of low-wage workers, a low-wage working class. It requires people who are seeking and who are willing to work for anything, and who are not able to fight for their own best good. And so this institution supports that. This institution where I'm sure many of you have heard that the number of beds in jails are directly related to third grade reading levels. I don't know if all of you have heard that. So they look at third grade reading levels to project how many beds they're going to need in the future. And then we don't invest in those third graders. We don't invest in them when they're in third grade, fifth grade, 12th grade, but we make money off of them when they get into jail. So obstacles to employment is poor education, and then a criminal record, and limited demonstratable skills. If you don't have an education, it is really hard to get a job, and if you have a criminal record, it's even harder to get a job. The Tutoring Project was working on this. The Tutoring Project was helping people get their GEDs and their HSEDs and helping people become proficient in English and helping people just to feel empowered and excited about learning, about being learners. But the Tutoring Project was not allowed to flourish in the jail. We had 30 tutors who were trained, and we were allowed to have about 8 or 10 who were in the jail. This system supports this requirement of unemployment and low-wage earners. And then when people come into jail, we make money off of them. We capitalize on their poverty and on their incarceration. So we talk about private prisons, which we can have lots of conversations about, but the state and federal and county governments make a lot of money as it is. And I shouldn't say make a lot of money. They have an economic interest in these institutions, in this industry thriving, because there are many people who are employed by this industry. The staff, the service providers, the people who bring resources like the mental health staff and the doctors and the food distributors, not the laundry folks, in some places, not in Dane County, but the people who provide all the supplies that we need. These industries need this institution to exist. And then we charge people. We charge people for phone calls. We charge people on commissary, and we increase the rates on things exorbitantly sometimes. We charge people for their doctor's visits. If somebody needs an aspirin, it costs them $5 to see the nurse to get that aspirin. And then we require people, some people are fortunate enough to receive Huber as part of their sentence. Huber is a work release privileges. When you're in Huber, though, which most people don't know, you have to pay room and board, $780 a month, rent to be in a cage in the jail. People come out in debt, and their last few paychecks are required to go to the jail. It's capitalism. One more, please, Brian. Oh, that was it. No, I guess that's right. Okay, this one's about white supremacy. And I feel like I've already covered a bunch of this, so I'm going to say some more, though. So there are, in the Dane County Jail, there are people of color, men and women and children of color, constitute about 50% of the population. And maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. It's right around 50%. Keep in mind that in our community, they constitute about 5% of the overall population. People who are in jail are almost exclusively poor as well. I don't know what the rate is. I don't know what that rate is for our county. But there's definitely a correlation in our county between race and poverty. And yet, the administration is 95% white. We talk about this as so white supremacy. I'm sure many of you have heard, and I've just already talked about how this is the current model of enslavement. There are direct parallels between this institution and the way people were treated on plantations, the way they were treated as Jim Crow, sharecropping, yes. Thank you. Yep. There are direct parallels. I mean, one of the most obvious parallels is that the majority of people who are at the bottom and who are being profited off of and who are being profited off of and abused in the process. Actually, can you go ahead one more slide, please? The majority of them are people of color, and they're all poor. And yet the staff is white. White men in positions of power with uniforms and badges and medals honoring them, and sometimes weapons. There's a direct parallel here. And as I just invite you to do some reading and to watch some movies. But what I realized recently was that, so when I was serving in the jail, I had this idea that if we could empower people on the inside, that they could affect change. And I'm still hopeful about that, but I realized I say that and I fail to see the jail as a plantation. I fail to see the people who are there as enslaved. Slavery ended in our country not because those who were enslaved rose up. They did rise up and they did affect change. It wasn't permanent, it wasn't long-lasting, it wasn't far-reaching necessarily. I mean, and Haiti's a little different, but in the contiguous United States, the enslaved people were not successful. And the people who are in the jail cannot do this on their own. They are invisible. They have no voice. As I've just described, there are arbitrary rules that are applied indiscriminately, inconsistently, and the consequences are severe. Not only will you go to segregation for some of those things that I mentioned, but you could have charges pending against you for some of those things. And then you have to go back to court, and now you have new criminal charges, which might send you to prison. How do you fight for yourself in that environment when you have no resources and you can't talk to each other and you're constantly being moved around and you don't even have a place to come together to worship? The plans for the new jail, for the renovation of the one jail, doesn't include a worship space. How do you empower yourself to change your life with all of this on your back? Slavery ended we could talk about the reasons, but slavery ended ultimately because people on the outside said, we are not going to tolerate this anymore. Whatever their motivation was, whether it was financial or ethical, whatever their motivation was, they were the ones who said, we are done with this. We have to rise up and change this. And we need to be part of that change. Because our brothers and sisters on the inside cannot do this themselves. And this is urgent, because that quickly someone can find themselves in this situation, having done nothing to deserve it. A mere allegation can change your life. Not being respectful enough to the police officer when he pulls you over can change your life. Not having a certain look about you, a certain posture or tone in your voice can change your life. We have got to rise up and end this. I'm going to open up to questions now, if anybody has questions. I thought that would take me 2 hours to get through. I guess I threw it at you pretty quickly. So, What questions do you have for me?
How do you suggest we go about changing it?
I've got lots of ideas. So, oh, don't worry about it, we'll get there later. So, there are 3 organizations that are present here today. Madison Area Urban Ministry is present, and John, who is not in here right now, is out there selling baked goods. I'd like to tell you about, well, I'll tell you about John in a second. But John, who's out there selling baked goods, that's one organization that you can definitely get involved in, you can support. Madison Area Urban Ministry does a lot of work with people who are returning from prison, but Linda Ketchum is an outspoken, conscientious critic of this entire system and of Dane County as well. We have Expo who is here, Jerome Dillard from Expo, and Expo is an organization that we really need to be supporting because Expo, I think you changed what your name means, but what I understand it used to mean at least was ex-prisoners organizing. And that is essential, that people who have served time are the ones who are changing this system, who are directing how this system is changed. Because as you can see, I haven't served time, but I gave you a whole bunch of information that I'm sure you had no idea about. Am I right? Okay. So, and those who have been incarcerated, who have been under the boot constantly, who have lived this inside and outside, who have served time in jail, in prison, and then who serve time on the outside through probation and parole and with the GPS monitoring. These are all other ways that you are still captured by the system. These are the folks who need to really be changing how we go forward. But Expo needs money, because Expo's base are people who have been incarcerated, and as I just told you, people are set up when they get out to fail. So they have got to work really hard to be successful. They aren't the ones who have the money to be supporting this. They need us to support them. And we have people from Moses here. Moses works with Expo, and I'm sure Moses may work with Mom. I'm not sure how all this works, but I'd be happy to bring you all together. But Moses is working on systemic change as well. And Moses is a large, generally faith-based organization, but they're hoping. Their desire is to expand to people who are just passionate about this and who are working on systemic change. Next month on July 29th, I will be facilitating another conversation. We're going to have a panel discussion. And this is going to be an interfaith panel discussion with people who have been incarcerated and people who have led worship in a variety of different forms of worship inside the jail, to speak about the importance of having a sacred space in the jail, a place where you can put your feet on holy ground, a place where you can be told that you are somebody, a place where you can be built back up. And Catherine and I are committed to a movement to ensure that there is a sacred space in the jail. Got lots of other ideas, but we are committed to that. So we would invite you to come back on July 29th to hear that panel presentation, and then be part of this movement that we are planning to lead with you. Those are some ways. I'm gonna let you guys do it.
With your termination of your job, is there a replacement that will be similar, or does the chaplaincy completely go away for the Dane County Jail?
Again, this is not a presentation that is affiliated with the Madison Area Jail Ministry. I want to be clear about that. There will be a and I do not speak for them, I do not represent them, and I'm completely a lone agent here. There will be a new chaplain. He'll be starting, if he hasn't already starting soon. He's a wonderful man. He'll be coming in part-time as the interim chaplain. Catherine and I together were both, Catherine was part-time, but she was working full-time. So the fact that he is going to be part-time means he's really probably just going to be in charge of worship at this point. Just facilitating worship services. There are new restrictions that have been placed upon the role of chaplain inside the jail. We have to pray for him, that he's able to do his job with faithful integrity. It's going to be hard for him.
When were these changes made? Just after you were, quote unquote, released, or what?
Yes. I don't want to talk about me and about our position, though. I really want to speak about the men and the women who, and the teens, the kids who are there.
Thank you, Krista, for your presentations. How much does the sheriff have to do, and how different is the jail system in this county as opposed to the other counties in our Synod? I don't live in Madison County. Are you speaking for my jail system too?
What county are you in?
Rock.
Okay. No, I'm speaking just for Dane County. I don't have experience in the other county jails. I've visited people there, but I don't have any inside experience. I don't know. Jerome, can you say anything to that?
A lot depending on the county exec and who the sheriffs are. It varies from county to county.
Okay.
And since I have a mic here, Krista, I do want to thank you for the excellent presentation. And I heard when you said that individuals are paying $780 a month for rent. And I know that just floored a lot of you all. This is something I've known for years. It does go on. And the fact is, these people are out in the community every day. And their families could use that help for the money that they're putting into a jail system that we have no idea where it goes, along with the millions of dollars in phone contracts. I mean, these companies pay Dane County Sheriff's Department to have those phones in that building. And video visiting is another big business that these companies are capitalizing on. Millions of dollars are flowing from these goods and services that you spoke of. And I thank you for touching on that, because our general public has no idea how this system works. And like you said, 97% of the convictions are plea bargains. And there's a reason for that too. But
Actually, I want to add to that. 97% of convictions are plea bargains, and I read in an Expo document that the DOC estimates that up to 70% of people in prison are actually innocent.
I have not read that.
Okay, I read it in an Expo document, okay. But anyhow, I found that. So check out Expo. In addition to the Prison Initiative Project, check out Expo, read their stuff. But David, regarding your question, it ultimately lies with the sheriff. I don't know that he is not involved in the day-to-day operations. He's not a micromanager. He trusts his people. And again, this is a militarized system. So you have to keep that in mind as well. He's a political figure, and he's the top of this system. So he just trusts that the ranks are doing what they are told to do. But ultimately, it lies with him. He's the one who's ultimately responsible.
You and Jerome both talked about the fact that 98% of the convictions that occur in Dane County come as a result of plea bargains. My question is, what percentage of the people that come through the sally port of the jail end up making a plea bargain?
Do you know that, Jerome? Did you hear that question? I'm sorry, I don't know that. What percentage of people that actually are booked into Dane County Jail end up making a plea deal?
Overall, it's a high percentage, 95 to 97.
Okay.
just to get out of there.
Yep. When you're in jail, it's not. Jail is so bad that people look forward to going to prison. Because when you're in that cage, you stay in that cage. You don't leave. You have your toilet there, you have your bed there, you eat there. You have rec occasionally. I mean, it's rare to be able to go to the gym. We're told that you get to go every week. That is not true. Just flat out not true. Not true. You don't leave. Mental health comes to you, medical comes to you. You don't leave your cage. So people are eager to get, and they're afraid. They're afraid because they don't feel well represented. And so, and people who are representing them really don't have time to do the work that they're supposed to do. So people just take the best deal they can get. As teacher Deb said in a panel a while ago, she said those high school kids would cut their leg off if they literally would saw it off if they were told you can get out right now. I mean, it's a horrid, horrid place to be. Even in the pretty building, it's an awful place to be. Okay.
Some of the conditions and rules and systemic deficiencies you're describing sound like they should be illegal themselves. They'd be criminal themselves. And so it is just outrageous to hear what inmates are putting up with. So would you say that the conditions we're talking about today have gotten progressively worse over the last 10, 15 years? Or whether it doesn't sound like there's much incentive for the administration to improve things. How much of it is politically driven, et cetera?
I'm going to defer to my friend Jerome again, because I've only served in the jail for 5 years. And this is Jerome's passion and his expertise.
I just felt what you were saying there. And Chaplain Krista touched on so many things. But I too myself worked in the jail as the Dane County Jail reentry coordinator. Best job I ever had in my life, but the worst job I ever had. It paid well, but there seemed to be no motivation for change. And that was my mission, being someone who's formerly incarcerated, to bring about change. Like she said, agencies that do the work have little to no access. We have a building that's practically empty that my vision was to turn into a reentry center where individuals from the community, agencies from the community could come in and work with these individuals so there would be a continuum of service when they left there. But I was told that's too aggressive. We would need to add staff, and et cetera, et cetera. But it seems to not be high on their goal or their agenda to improve the lives of the individuals who they're supposed to care for. And so the frustrating part for me, if I can take a minute, was being in that jail and seeing the individuals who were on community corrections cycling in and out of the jail. What we don't know, if we get stopped for speeding, they're going to take our license, write us a ticket, and send us on our way. But if you're on supervision in this state, they have an 800 number that they call. And they call that 800 number, and 9 times out of the 10 is going to say, take them into custody. Number 1, it's against your rule to have police contact. And number 2, the agent has to look into this because he's had that police contact. So they call that 800 number. You're going to jail. Sometimes you sit there for 2 to 3 days. Sometimes it could be a week before your agent get around to seeing you. I'm not bashing the system. I'm telling you what I witnessed and what was so frustrating for me because I knew so many of them. And I call agents and say, his job is on the line. Can we get him out of there? Well, we have to do our investigation. He got a ticket What's the investigation about? I mean, so I don't want to get on my soapbox, but we have a broken system, and in Wisconsin, we seem to be immune to any change whatsoever. So many states are doing better than we are. So many. Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana are doing better than we are in transforming their criminal justice system. What is wrong with us? Yeah, I'm done.
I will say that we have seen a reduction in programming in the jail. And in the last year specifically, Catherine and I have seen that. And the reason we're told is because the jail's going through a renovation process. I'm not sure I believe that. I don't, for instance, they reduced the amount of time that women could have in worship. So Catherine and I came with solutions for how women could get the time back. First of all, you have to keep in, so women are given an hour for worship. We don't do Lutheran-style worship in the jail. We are not out in an hour. We don't have time for conversations and for testimony and for praise and for word and for all the things we need to have in 1 hour. We just don't have time for it. So Catherine and I said, why don't you let us lead worship during lockdown? That's when everybody's locked in their cages. Just lock us in the chapel. You know where we are. We're locked in. You got the cameras. We're right next to the deputy station. That wasn't an option. So it's not about renovation. It is about, I don't know what it's about, but we felt the pressure and we saw the changes constantly. Every week something was reduced. Every week. Next question. Oh, somebody over. Yeah, Dennis.
Krista, first I just want to acknowledge how much you're going to be missed. As a volunteer, I've heard from some of the guests at our weekly service that there's a great sadness there, and I just want to pass that on to you and thank you for the years of compassion that you have and love you provided. Yes. I guess my question concerns working in a system that is admittedly inhumane. What did you see as the effect of this spirit-deadening system on the deputies and the staff? And as chaplain, how did you respond to that? I have two responses to that. The first is that it is hard to break in with the staff. But we were working on it. We were really working on it, and we were starting to make progress. We had people stopping by our office to talk. We were having late night conversations. We have people who were coming to check out our library. The first time it happened, I was shocked. Somebody was roaming or was just standing by the office looking in, just hanging there, and I thought, what does he want? And then after we had some chit-chat and he walked away, I thought, oh, he wanted to talk. I didn't realize that. So I was more cognizant going forward. But it's hard to break in with the staff. I do have a concern for their spiritual care, for their souls. They're doing what they are required to do in order to keep their jobs. But I can't imagine what a toll it takes on a person to have to treat someone that way. I mean, I see staff who are full of integrity and love and compassion, who treat people that way as much as they can. But when the rules have to be enforced, they have to be enforced. Whenever I saw staff doing good things, or as often as I could, and Catherine too, we would send notes to the sergeants and lieutenants and just say, this deputy did something so integrous, and we need to share it with you. One of my concerns is, and I don't have a solution to it, but it's something I realized early on. The majority of the staff are white. They are instructed
or advised not to live in Madison, preferably not in Dane County, but definitely not in Madison where the jail is, to live in outlying areas. Many of them come from rural communities. Many of them have no friendships, no lived experience with people of color. Their experience begins when they enter the jail. And their relationship then with people of color is based on people of color who are locked in cages and who are identified by number, who are suspicious, who are threats, who are all these things we just talked about. And I know that the county does racial bias training, but when you're there for 5 or 7 years every day, and then you are required to treat people in inhumane ways. And you're there for 5 to 7 years because that's your probation period. The deputies who serve in the jail aren't there generally because they want to be. When you become a sheriff's deputy, you are required to spend the first 5 to 7 years in the jail to get to know your people. And how do you get to know them? As suspicious criminals who are locked in cages, who are identified by number and treated as less than human. So how do we expect them to act differently on the streets? We're creating this problem. We're perpetuating this problem. Yes, Jerome?
I just, to touch on his question,
Okay.
I know that alcoholism runs rampant with individuals who works in the prisons and the jail. And so does suicide. I worked in a prison, and in the 2 years that I was there, I know of 2 really good people who committed suicide, who were guards in the prison. It runs rapid, and there is some data out there that supports that suicide amongst employees of prisons and jail is the highest among any industry in the country. And alcoholism, I mean, that's how they cope. And some of them go home to their families and treat their children in a manner that oftentimes is just second nature for them to militarize or I can't think of the term, but and divorce is very high amongst jail staff, jail and prison staff. I know that there's data on that though, so I did want to touch on that.
Any other questions? Someone in the back, Stephen.
Hello, my name is John Brown. I'm one of Jerome's close friends. And I also been incarcerated over 20 years of my life. And the point that she said about the teaching of the behavior is I'm mostly studying behaviors now. But when she said that inside the jailhouse, because it was me. I got to know the police inside the jailhouse because they stayed in there over half a year, and we got to know each other, you know. But I didn't know it like she's saying it. I didn't know it like she's saying it at the time. But it's a taught behavior, that everything that's going on in our system is a practice of taught behavior. So once you see the taught behavior of it, that's the only way you stop it. You can't stop it by saying, so how we going to do this? You already been fooled. This practice has been going on for centuries. And we see it now. It's a taught behavior coming from us as a whole. If you look like a rat, we play you like a rat. But you don't have to be a rat. See, I came from a long journey of understanding because I touched things you said not touch, but in certain things that you touch, truth come out of it. And I paid the difference for 52 years to know the difference. And I did many things to society. I sold many drugs. I went into understandings that I can't understand how I got there. But I paid attention for 52 years on how could I get from one situation to another one. So what she said about taught behaviors, they don't even know it because their job invested on it. And they become friends with me sometimes, but when I see them in society, they will hold me on the ground and say it's a practice and with no feelings. And I didn't have feelings because I know it was a practice. My behaviors were mine and there one there, but we didn't know the difference in the behaviors. And sometimes they go too far. So right now, what we in here right now for is, how do our practice get back to a point of understanding so we can move forward? That's why I'm here today. And I also got a big service that I'm dealing with, homeless and everything, that I do have connection with, that I do make a difference right now. But the practice right now that I came here for is, how can all of us get on the same page? Because the answer is in this room. It don't have to be in many voices, but when one move, all move. That's what Jerome been trying to do. He been a single force in Madison since when I was doing crime, he changed my life. And when I got out of prison, I paid it back. But that's what Jerome been trying to do, but it's so hard to do with our own race because we condition. I have a hard time dealing with my mother, fathers, everything in my community. Because we condition to a point that we don't know what God is, because we listen to the blind a lot. And what she said about practice, we are on the right page towards just change the practice and not the people.
Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. It's imperative for each of us in this room to be doing everything that we can to advocate for those that are incarcerated, whether it be in the Dane County Jail or in the prison system, because they don't have a voice. My son is 29. Because of mental health issues, he has been in and out of the Dane County Jail. And during that time, I have seen them do what I would call CYA. A lot of their positions, a lot of their rules are not for the individuals that are inside. They are for covering the county's butt so that they don't get sued. By the same token, I have had some deputies that were absolutely wonderful and bent over backwards when my son's half-sister killed herself, and we needed to communicate that with him. But by and large, everybody is trying to do their job in this very narrow, confining system that is designed to be punitive and not loving. My son went to court, and the defense attorney, the prosecuting attorney, and the judge all decided that he should be in a program. So the outcome was that he was evaluated by the people from the program, and he kept getting these notices from the deputies saying, "You are not eligible to be on a bracelet." And he kept saying, "I don't know what they're talking about because I didn't ask them to be on a bracelet." So after a couple of weeks and several of these messages getting to him, I contacted his attorney, and she was flummoxed. We didn't know what was going on. Finally, I called the people at the program, and I said, "My understanding is that you have evaluated Aaron and that he is appropriate for your program. Can you tell me what happens now?" And he said, "I give the deputies a list of inmates that are appropriate for our program, and then I don't get into the politics of it." I said, "What? Wait a minute. Are you telling me that the deputies are making the decision as to whether or not my son can be in this program?" Well, we wrote a letter to the judge. Said, "Why are we wasting everybody's time? We're wasting the judge's time, we're wasting the DA's time, we're wasting defense attorney's time. What are we doing all this for if the power basically lies with the deputies at the jail?" Well, needless to say, she wasn't very happy. And He got out within 2 days. But while he was in, he was attending classes at MATC. And I would pick him up every day for his classes, drop him off at MATC, and return him to the jail. Well, now when he was out, he couldn't go to classes because now he was on a bracelet. So I called the deputies and I told them how really stupid this was. And I had a deputy in my kitchen threatening me. So it doesn't always matter that a person is incarcerated in the building. We have to make sure that the people, all the way from the lowliest person in the jail, all the way to Sheriff Mahoney, and the same thing with the prisons, knows that there's people outside looking in, watching what they're doing.
You were going to tell us about Just Bakery as an option?
Actually, I wanted to tell you about, well, Linda, do you want to say something about Just Bakery since it's your program? Or Stephen, would you like to speak about Just Bakery? Since we have representatives from Madison Area Urban Ministry here, let them speak about their programs. They will do a much better job than me.
Thank you. Thanks, Krista. If you're not familiar with Just Bakery, it's a 12-week vocational training program for people who have chronic barriers to employment, especially criminal conviction and incarceration. The program actually teaches, it's pretty intense. It's 30 hours a week for 12 weeks, and then you can also learn storefront. But I'll keep this short. We've been operating the program now since August of 2013. We create a line of baked goods. Our students, as of this year, we are utilizing the National Restaurant Association Manage First curriculum. So our students who go that pathway, we have 3 pathways in the program. Students who want to go with that path can take the certification exams for each of those 5 areas under that Manage First. If each one of those exams that they pass correlates to hours of credit at Madison College, they can get up to 12 credits. And we have a memorandum of understanding with Madison College for our students who want to go to Madison College, who complete those. There's an automatic acceptance, which is a huge change from 11 years ago when we first started in talking about creating this program, when we were told that no, absolutely not, our students would, no. So that's big. We're a pre-apprenticeship program now as well, so students are getting that credit. And mostly it's just, we're talking about life skills, we're talking about case management, employment, housing assistance, and learning a commercial trade that can get you into a pathway, either to own your own business, a food cart, get you into college. So there's some baked goods back there. Joseph, who's standing right there by the back door, who works with Just Bakery, is a former student and has been a mom employee now for a couple of years. And I'm sure he'd be happy to share his story with you when you stop back there and buy something. So was that subtle enough?
Yes,
So-
and he has a remarkable story.
Yes, he does.
Remarkable story. So you should go purchase something
So-
and talk to him. You'll want to hear his story. Yes. Thank you. No, you need to go buy something from him to hear his story.
Krista, that a couple of weeks ago I was able to go to the Wisdom event for the candidates for governor, and all of the people that were there that night made a commitment to prison reform. The question I have is, in the midst of all that we've heard today, at that level, does prison reform impact anything that's happening at the county level?
mean, I have some thoughts, but again, Jerome's the expert in this. I'm able to tell you what I'm able to see. I mean, I think that one of the most effective and necessary changes would be to address the revocation system, the probation and parole system, and the ways that people are penalized for non-criminal offenses, and the way that they can be locked up on allegations. I believe we are the only state in the country that does that, that locks people up on allegations, and you don't even have to have proof. You don't have to have data. You can just call and say, I saw Joe selling drugs. That's enough for them to lock someone up and do an investigation. And and again, since 50% of the people in prison are there because of revocation, if we want to change the prison system, that's a really important, critical place to look. Do you want to say anything else, Jerome, to his question? I'm so glad you came.
You know, thank you for, number one, attending the gubernatorial forum that we had in Pewaukee. I feel that it starts from the top, and I mentioned earlier that Wisconsin seems to be immune to any reform in the criminal justice system, and the little reform that I've seen personally is the expansion of GPS monitoring and electronic monitors that collects you in when you come in the house and when you're leaving the house, but GPS monitoring also. Those are the reforms that we have to be aware of, because we're no longer will be putting people into physical prisons, but they will become prisoners in their communities and in their homes if we do not watch it. I quit saying reform a couple of years ago because this system needs a true transformation. And the commitment that I heard from those candidates that Monday night in Pewaukee is a start, because number one, criminal justice has not come up in any of the elections in the last 10 years. There's been no talk about it. It just doesn't exist. When we really, really have a broken criminal justice system with the dollars that we're spending on our criminal justice system, on prisons in this state, I think it's time to get that at the forefront of this election. And also, it trickles down. The state can lead the way in transforming some of our county systems just by having that dialogue and saying what they're going to do. Right now, they're feeding on each other. And when I worked in the Dane County Jail, the majority of the individuals that were inside that jail were there on PO holds. That was my pet peeve.
That means probation.
Probation and parole holds. The majority. And I don't know, in Milwaukee County, the Milwaukee County Jail refused to hold PO holds. So what did they do? They built a new prison inside of Milwaukee called Milwaukee Secure Detention Facility, which is a torture chamber. They never see sunlight. They get no fresh air. There's no human contact. All visits are through video. And it gets to be 120, 115 degrees inside of that prison. But yet it sits on the highway, downtown Milwaukee. Millions of people ride by there and see all these windows, not knowing that there's a box inside of those windows. You never see a light on inside of those windows. And so it's a touchy situation because we can reform one way, but it can make things even worse for many individuals who have spun into hopelessness. And it's going to take the agencies, it's going to take the community to restore these individuals and to bring back that hope or that sparkle in their eyes. I hope. Well, we have to keep these issues before them and continue to have them to expound on those. What will you do? You saying, yes, you will do. How will you do it? What does this look like? What will it look like under your administration? Will you hire people who have been impacted by the system when you become governor? Or Governor Walker, will you hire people?
Krista, thanks for your presentation. Powerful. And you've named and part of the anesthetic that I call that plagues our state, that allows us to not feel the pain of our neighbors who are in this system. The white supremacy, the capitalism, and patriarchy. We are have breathed that air so long that we don't see, we don't feel. And to me, that helps explain why there aren't 200 churches represented surrounding that Capitol when that legislature is in session saying, you have to change this system. And there aren't that many churches, there aren't that many people there around that Capitol, because we all are victims of an anesthetic, it seems to me, that has prevented us from feeling. And like you pointed out, the newspaper and the media, they have a message that keeps coming through. I'm really sorry that the interior policy that you experienced, just got tighter, and it seems tighter and tighter. In my 8 years there, I didn't experience as many of those. I did see quite a number, but not quite as restricting and suffocating as I've heard you describe. Could you, well, for one, I'm curious if a future chaplain there came to you and was looking for some suggestions how to work in that system, how to be light and presence there. At some point I'd be curious what suggestions you might have, and maybe you need a little more distance from it, but more, I guess, for our benefit as people, most of us probably involved in some way in a congregation somewhere. What's your suggestions? You've suggested the movie, the read list, and so on, because until we know what we're up against, you really can't really call them to account for. A sheriff's department is pretty much just responsible to the county government, basically, that pays them, and they get to make their policies the way they get to make them. And depending on the person, who's captain, who's lieutenant, so forth, those things shift and change year to year. But so I guess my question is, what are some of your best suggestions for us as we go forward from here about not leaving here with utter despair, which would almost be fitting, but with an eye towards continued action and growth. Appreciate your mentioning Moses, because that's one place congregations can
absolutely
connect and say, look, we want to work for system change. We know that tinkering isn't going to do it. The system must change.
Yep.
So these are 3 organizations that I mentioned that I would recommend that you learn more about, you support. There's some information on the back regarding those organizations. Serena, my friend Serena, is going to put some information on the back about our friend Khalif, which we would love for you to pick up and read and take some action on. I would also recommend, Jane Henning is here. Is Jane still here? Jane's here with Grace Episcopal, and Jane is in the very, very beginning stages of trying to figure out how Grace Episcopal can be welcoming to people upon release. That's Catherine and I met with her, and that's something that Catherine is passionate about too, is can the churches be present to meet people when they get out at 5:30 in the morning? Is there somewhere for them to go and to get breakfast and to get their ducks in line, maybe to get a bus pass or a backpack if they're homeless? It is so hard to carry your stuff around in plastic bags. And so anyhow, Grace Episcopal and Jane and Catherine would be somebody to talk to about that. I recommend that you go to court. Just go sit in court and observe. If you're clergy, go with your caller. You don't have to know what's going on. Just go with your caller and observe, because they will know that you're there and they will conduct themselves a little bit differently, knowing that they're being watched by clergy. So I recommend that, but just go and spend a day or a half a day or whatever time you have and observe what's going on in there. Just observe the disparities that happen in there. Observe how quickly people move through in there. Just go, but be a witness. Some people, sometimes it just feels good to know there's somebody in there, that they're not all alone. It's a scary place to be all by yourself. So to know that there's somebody there who, regardless of why they are in court, they are a child of God. And that's enough. And you can have compassion for them and deep compassion for the victim, if there is a victim in the situation. And then again, those are just some examples, some ideas. Pick up the reading list. And please come back on July 29th when we have our panel conversation. Please come back for that. Oh, Catherine's got a suggestion.
Yes, I think I would like to challenge you to become welcoming communities. That whole thing about meeting people at the door. But it's really, really challenging because you have a continuum of people that have been victims, that have been perpetrators, and also have been victims, have family members that are, incarcerated, and there's shame attached all along the way. And our churches do not do a good job of receiving people. You're going to have to become a non-judgmental space. You're going to have to become an open space that can talk about all those feelings and all of that kind of continuum. But people really need you, and sometimes it is as simple as a bus pass or a backpack. But they're coming out with trauma. They're coming out with legal needs, with housing needs, with employment needs, and that we need to wrap around them as ministries.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. I think we're going to turn it over to Michelle.
I know we could keep going longer, but to honor our time commitment, we'll close. Really appreciate this discussion and the things that Krista has brought to us, which is exactly what I think our mission is, because too often, as you were saying, we don't know. We have lived and been desensitized or not had to pay attention, lived privileged lives too often in our congregations and in the world that, white people, frankly, are able to live in. So through these presentations and through what Krista shared with us today, if we can just open our awareness to realize that what we live isn't what everybody lives, and we are all children of God. So I think those questions about what do we do is, I think we sit with the stew of, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do, but I'd better figure it out, because there have been a whole lot of people who have been trying to figure it out for a whole long time. while systems have kept their foot on their necks. And I really appreciate things I didn't know, Krista, just to talk about the system that also so significantly impacts those people who are oppressing, because we know if you're one of those people, it does something to your soul and being. So the need that we all have and need to embrace together, how do we begin to talk together? Just open dialogue, have conversations, and we don't have to have the answers. We just have to have the questions and the passion that says, we can't do this alone. And I really appreciate this, because I think as churches we've been good at when Jesus said, if I am hungry, you gave me food. If I was thirsty, you gave me drink. Naked, and you clothed me. In prison, and you came unto me. We do the first quite well as a church. I don't think we're very good at doing the last. So really appreciate this and look forward to the next presentation in July, when Krista will host the panel talking about incarceration and sacred space. I'm really intrigued by that. Looking forward to that. And then again in August when we look at the border. So thank you once again for coming, and God be with you.